Hi everyone, my name is Beth Devine. I'm president of the Wappingers Historical Society. Welcome to Pathway Through History. In the past few years, you've met the men and women who contributed to the history of the Hudson Valley when you came to special tours that we had right here at Mesier Homestead. This year, because of COVID, we've had to come up with a different format. And so we're going to bring those historical characters to you. Characters who are played by society members, by people in the local community and students from Ketcham High School. Today, you're going to hear from that famous Revolutionary War spy, Enoch Crosby. You'll hear from a friend of the Abolitionist Soujouner Truth and a friend of the Wappingers Sachem, Chief Daniel Ninham, and Orson Fowler, a suffragette, Pieter Mesier and his wife Catherine, and Nicholas Brewer, who built this house and lived here almost 300 years ago. We hope you enjoy our program, and now let's go in and meet Nicholas Brewer.
Good morrow and welcome to my home. This property was originally purchased by my father, Adolphus Brewer. Born in the New Netherlands, it's the area you now know as Flatbush. He purchased this property and the lands besides the Wappingers Creek in 1741, a total of 755 acres. Upon his death, untimely, being struck by lightning, I was granted administration of the estate. Allow me to introduce myself. I'm Nicholas Brewer, Sr. On one occasion, I had the opportunity to surprise the Commander-in-Chief of the Continental Army, General George Washington himself, when I presented him with a horse, saddle, bridle, sword, and pistols, and to his black servant Harris, a horse, saddle, and bridle. The general said, "I am here to thank you for all you've done for the Continental Army. I'm not here to receive more gifts." My son Nicholas served as a captain in the New Hackensack Militia, and my son Adolphus served as a lieutenant in the regulars. And as his duty, he would travel the Hudson with barge delivering supplies to West Point. Sadly, on one occasion, returning with supplies, it was a terrible storm and he fell from the barge into the river and died. Before we even heard word, my wife Sarah came to me and said, "Nicholas, something has happened to Adolphus. I don't know what it is, but something bad has happened." Shortly thereafter, they brought in the lifeless body of my son, and he was ultimately buried in the family plot. I was devastated by the loss of my eldest son. General Washington also grieved. He knew my son and was very fond of him. The general even blamed himself because he had given the orders for my son to return for supplies. General George Washington had promised to repay my family for all the supplies we had offered them, but we were grateful for what we did for the Continental Army. We were good patriots. In 1777, I passed away in Albany, 6 years before the end of the Revolutionary War, and I was buried in the New Hackensack Cemetery.
Hello, my name is Patience Lambert, and I would like to tell you about a most important man, Daniel Ninham. Although I never had the privilege of meeting him, I wish I had. Daniel Ninham was a sachem, or leader, of the Wappinger Indian tribe. He became the most important Native American of the lower Hudson Valley. It is said he learned to speak English by listening to the family of his neighbor, Catherine Brett, of the Madam Brett Homestead in Beacon, New York. Daniel was an educated man, and because of his multicultural talents, was called upon many times to go to court to defend the tribal ancestral lands illegally obtained by the British. He even went to London to plead a case before the court of King George. A local London newspaper described the Ninham group of 4 chiefs as tall and strong. One was 6.5 feet tall, without shoes, dressed in the Indian manner. Unfortunately, claiming that returning their lands would set a very bad precedent, Daniel lost his court battle. Upon returning home, he proclaimed his loyalty to the Patriots. General George Washington appointed Daniel as a captain in the Continental Army, and serving as a diplomat, traveled all across the Northeast, attempting to bring the Indian nations over to the Patriot cause. He later served with the Stockbridge Militia Company, a Native American military unit commanded by his son, Captain Abraham Ninham. You see, Daniel reasoned that if they fought in the Revolution and they formed a new American government, that this government would return their tribal lands. On a brutally hot summer day in 1778, the Scouts, with members of his own tribe, alongside the Patriots, clashed with British forces. The number of Wappinger Indians present at this battle has been widely disputed. Some say 20, some say as many as 40. Regardless of the number, they fought with great courage and spilled much British blood. This battle took place in the Bronx at Kingsbridge, now known as Van Cortlandt Park. At this, Ninham's last stand, as he saw the British closing in, called to his warriors to flee, claiming, "I am an aged tree. I will die here." More prophetic words were never spoken. Daniel was shot in the back of the head as he attempted to pull British Lieutenant Colonel Simcoe from his horse. His warriors fought on until all had died in what became known as the Kingsbridge Massacre. Bodies were strewn across the battlefield. Dogs came and ate the human flesh. Daniel Ninham's body was all but devoured. The bodies were later buried with stones upon the graves, not as a tribute to their sacrifice, but to prevent animals from digging up the bodies. Some of this battle took place at Tibbetts Brook. The name was later changed to Indian Bridge, as it is still known today. So if you should travel through the fields or the woods at Van Cortlandt Park, where the final battle of Daniel Ninham, the last Sachem of the Wappinger Indians, last stood, you may just see his spirit or hear the war cries of his fallen comrades. Yes, Daniel Ninham was both a diplomat and a warrior, and someone we should never forget.
Welcome, everybody. My name's Pieter Mesier, and I want to talk to you a little bit about myself and my family here. I was a very prosperous merchant down in New York City at the beginning of the Revolutionary War times. I was loyal to my king, though, King George, and many of the patriotic people in the city at the time grew angry at me and my businesses, so they burnt them to the ground. My reluctance was to come north, and eventually I came to this spot here and bought this house from Matthew Van Benchen. My family settled in quite quickly. My children loved it. But my wife, Catherine, was not so happy with it, as she was socially known down in New York City from a wealthy family and had very much friendships with other socialites like herself. She also was a good Christian woman and enjoyed going to services in the city, especially on the Lenten and Holy Week services. So when she asked me if she could go to the city and make trips there, I agreed most readily, because when she was away, the household ran well, and so she was happy with what she was doing. And so it was good for a long time, until in 1781, I was called upon for a hearing to go to explain why Catherine was making so many trips to the city. Our patriotic neighbors had decided perhaps she was spying for the British. So I was told that Either she would stop going down to the city and spend the end of the time of the war within the Dutchess County boundaries, or I would have to pay 100 pounds to the state of New York. I went back to Catherine and she agreed to do so, reluctantly. But so it was. Eventually, you will hear later about how Catherine lived life up here. As for these pictures to the left of me, they are my father and mother. That is Peter and Jeanette in their finest wares of the time. A very handsome looking couple, I would say. I've been told I look much like my father. On this side, you'll see a picture that was painted by Len Titilio, who's a Hudson River resident, and it shows my great-grandfather's mill, built in 1695. You can tell it's on the tip of Manhattan Island. And over the years, much landfill filled in the area, and it became known as the City of New York, and that was the spot where the mill stands, was the spot where the World Trade Center and the Southern Tower stood, approximately in that same spot. And that is my life here now has been 4 generations. And so it has been up until 1891, when my great-grandson, Henry, decided to sell the homestead and 5 acres of land to the village of Wappingers for $5,000. But his stipulation was this, that Mesier Homestead would always be called that, and the park would always be known as Mesier Park. And so it is. Now we still have residents in the area. My great-granddaughter married a Reese, and the Reese family lives down in New Hamburg area on the Ober Creek farm. Alex Reese is still alive, so I'm proud to say we still have relatives here in the area. So I wish to thank you for hearing me, and have a good day.
Hi, my name is Catherine Mesier. Welcome to my home. I was out in my herb garden, so let me put these aside. And excuse my appearance because I was out there in that garden. Herbs are very important to the colonial people. We use herbs for many things, for cooking, for in the apothecary, and for scenting our homes. I have sage, and sage is great for healing wounds, cleaning wounds, and we have many of those here working on a farm. We have dill that is used in seasoning, and it's wonderful for baby's colic. We have lavender. It's wonderful to scent our homes and our clothing. Being that we live on a farm with the animals, our home is not always the freshest, and so we like to keep it that way. We also have rosemary. Rosemary is wonderful for memory, and it's used in baking wedding cakes as a sign, a tribute to the wedding couple of the remembrance and the fond thoughts we have for them. Now, one of the most important one is bee balm or bergamot, and that is used for tea. It's a substitute that we use. Oh, speaking of tea, I have a story for you. Not a happy story for us, but 3 days in my life and my husband, Peter, were terrible. Peter's a merchant, and he has a little store right in the back, and he sells many things. One of the things are tea. Peter, knowing that tea is important, has charged exorbitant prices for it. It's a staple with the colonials, and so it's something they need. I told him many times not to charge that much. It was not fair to his neighbors. He would not listen to me. He didn't think I knew much about business, even though I've worked beside him and been his wife for 18 years. Our neighbors were not happy with him. Peter was a loyalist. He was in favor of King George, which is one thing they were not happy about. They felt he was a traitor. He did not support the patriotic cause for freedom from Great Britain. So when they realized his tea prices were so high, that was just one more fly in the ointment. Peter was away this particular day, beautiful May morning, Monday, as a matter of fact, if I remember correctly, 1777. A group of women came into our store and wanted to purchase tea. They also had two gentlemen with them. They had Tom Rouse and Sam Hull. They were colonial soldiers. I was alone and tending the store. I thought I could help them and they would be happy. They said to me, "We want tea, but we're not paying the price you're asking. It's not a fair price. We would like to give you what we feel is the fair price." I said, "That's not what we're charging." They took the tea, they put money on the counter and said, "That's what you're getting," and they left the store. When Peter returned and I told him what had happened, he was so angry at the brassiness and boldness of the group. He was there the next day, Tuesday, when they returned. This time there were women and there were some men, but the men stayed outside this time. The women said they wanted the tea at the price that was fair, the price that they would pay for that tea. Peter laughed at them. Peter says, "No, this is my price. I'm a merchant, and this is what I'm charging." The ladies were very angry. Peter said, "Ladies, go home, tend your children. This is not a concern of yours." Well, they were furious. They knocked over shelves, they shouted, they screamed, there was pushing and shoving. I was in the corner, trembling. I'd never seen anything like this before in my life. One of the gentlemen that was outside was a colonial soldier, Tom Rouse. He came into the store. He pushed Peter down to the floor and he said, "You are going to give us what we want." He grabbed Peter by the throat and he said, "I will hit you with my broadsword if you do not let us take what we want." There was a lady that was there, an elderly lady, and she also grabbed Peter and said, "Mr. Mesier, you are going to do what we say or you'll be very sorry." Peter was rattled. He didn't know what to do. He let them leave. The next day, Wednesday, no one came to the store. And Peter and I were relieved. We thought perhaps all of the confusion and upsetting over the tea was over. But we were wrong. Thursday morning, as I was opening the shades to the store, I saw a group of men and women yelling and screaming, so angry. "Peter, Peter, they're coming. What should we do?" Peter raced and bolted the door. I had my two children with me and I held them behind my skirt because I wanted to protect them from this. They were crying and didn't know what was going to happen. My babies were so scared. Peter blocked the door and they commanded him to open it, saying that they had paperwork that they had the right to search our home and store. He said, "I need to see the paperwork." They couldn't produce it. They broke in the door and they came in and they went through every room in our house and everything in the store. They took Peter outside, dragging him out with our two servants, Tom and Polly, and they beat them in the front courtyard. I said, "Mercy, mercy, please don't do this," but they didn't listen to me. I came back into the store. They were going through all of our personal things, taking tea, going to the cellar, drinking everything that we had, breaking casks of wine, breaking open jugs of whiskey. They drank all of Peter's spirits. After they decided to leave, I went out and got Peter to come in with our servants, and I tended to their wounds. They were beaten quite badly. And I was using sage to help them, which I was glad I had it in hand. Peter didn't know what to do after this. He thought long and hard. We looked around our house. We saw the damage. They broke pictures. They broke a lot of trifles, took the tea. We were very much confused about what to do. Peter decided that he would lower tea prices, and quietly we lived in the community. It's been called the Wappingers Tea Party, those 3 terrible days that we suffered. And many people applauded and cheered it, just like it was a 4th of July celebration. But to us, it was a terrible time. I would rather forget it ever happened.
Isabella Baumfree was my friend. She was born a slave around 1797 on a Dutch estate in Ulster, New York. Isabella's original owners only spoke Dutch, so that was the only language that she knew. By the age of 13, she had been sold 3 times. Some of her owners were kind, while others were very cruel, especially when Isabella didn't follow their orders because she didn't understand English. Isabella, or Belle as I called her, fell in love at the age of 18. His name was Robert, and he was a slave from a nearby farm. Sadly, they were not allowed to marry due to ownership by different masters. But Belle was headstrong, and they continued to see each other until the owners found out. They were both beaten for it, and Robert, he was beaten so severely that he died. Belle was forced to marry another slave, and together they had 5 children. Belle was an imposing woman. She stood about 6 feet tall, and when she was finally entitled to her freedom, Master Dumont refused. Leaving her no choice, she left her other children behind and ran away with her infant daughter. Isabella came to my farm, here in New Paltz, New York. My name is Maria Van Wagenen. My husband Isaac and I welcomed Isabella and her baby into our home. Soon after, Dumont arrived to bring her back to his farm. He settled down and sold her to us, and we immediately set her free. Then she found out that Dumont illegally sold her 1-year-old son, Peter. With our help, Belle filed a lawsuit against Dumont. She won her case and was reunited with her son. This was the first time a Black woman sued a white man in the United States courts and won. Justice prevailed. Isaac and I, we are devout Christians, and this had a deep impact on Belle. She became very spiritual, and Belle decided to move to New York City. There, she began working for evangelist Elijah Pearson, but Pearson died suddenly, and Belle was accused of poisoning him. She went to court and was found innocent. Belle then filed a slander suit against her accusers. Isabella became, yet again, the first person, Black person, to win this type of case against a white person. 10 years later, Belle realized her mission was to preach the word of God. She changed her name to Soujouner Truth. She became an abolitionist and an advocate for equality for Black women, men, and soldiers. She supported the women's right to vote. Belle, now known as Sojourner Truth, traveled all over the United States with her message. Although she could not read or write, Belle dictated her life story to Olive Gilbert. This autobiography was titled The Narrative of Sojourner Truth. It was published in 1850. Sojourner Truth continued her work into the 1870s, even though her health was failing. On November 26, 1883, Belle's work was done. She could finally rest in the arms of her Lord. Her age was recorded as 86, but her tombstone read 105 years old. Isabella's life had a dismal beginning, but her fearlessness and beliefs in equality for all brought about many social changes. She found her true calling, and the world became a better place. Sojourner Truth, Isabella Baumfree, was a great woman. I loved her. We were friends.
Oh, how do you do? Come in, come in. Don't be shy. My name is Orson Squire Fowler, and while I had many interesting things in my life during the 1800s, including I was an advocate of women's rights and children's rights, I'm probably best known for two things: my 8-sided octagon house and my writings and lectures on phrenology. Well, phrenology is the study of the shape of the human skull. Well, I believe that the bumps on our skull can indicate very clearly a person's intellect, their moral character, and, well, enough of that right now. I'll get to that later. First things first, I was born in 1809, October 11th, in Cohocton, New York, to Martha and Horace Fowler. Graduated Amherst College, 1834, and despite having very little education in architecture, I decided to build an octagon house. Yes, I purchased 147 acres along what is now Route 9, and I situated my house on an area of land. There is now a general food store there now. It's called, Adams. Now you see, I thought an octagon house was actually less expensive to build. It had a lot of light, so it was easier to heat in the winter, keep cool in the summer, had all of this extra space. And, well, I was so excited about it, I wrote a book. Yes, it was called A Home for All, a new, cheap, convenient, and superior mode of home building. What, you think that title is too long? I think it's just right. Anyway, because of my book, there were thousands of octagon houses built across the United States and Canada. But sadly, in 1857, I was going through some financial difficulties, and I had to leave my house and rent it out, and well, then eventually I had to sell it. And I must tell you, on that day, my heart was broken. And then in 1897, the house had not been lived in for countless years. It fell into disrepair. It was condemned, and it had to be torn down. I am glad I was not alive to see that happen. And the people of the town called my octagon house Fowler's Folly. Well, let me tell you, another of my passions is phrenology. And my brother Lorenzo and I, we actually opened up a phrenology practice in New York City. We charged 25 cents to have people's skulls examined. His wife Lydia joined us on our lectures and our tours. She was, by the way, the second woman in the United States to earn a medical degree. And I must tell you, those years together, just the three of us, they were among the happiest of my life. And we had some very famous people come to us to have their skulls measured. We had, President James Garfield for one, and there were, several writers, Edgar Allan Poe, Walt Whitman, Mark Twain, just to name a few. And I can assure you, having measured those skulls, those men were true geniuses, and they possessed sterling moral character. Well, let me show you my chart, and you can see. You see, I believe that where a trait is foremost, the bump on the brain is larger at that point because, well, the brain is larger at that point. So there may be a bump of intellect or a bump of artistry or a bump of benevolence, a bump of cautiousness, as you can see. Now, my critics, They thought that, well, it was the fact that I knew something about the backgrounds of those individuals and their education, and that is how I drew my conclusions, having nothing to do with the size of the bumps. So they said my phrenology was actually a pseudoscience, meaning not a real science at all, and phrenology went out of fashion. So the two most important things in my life, there was the Octagon House, was called Fowler's Folly, and phrenology was called a pseudoscience. Now, any other man would fall into despair over that. But for me, no! Because if you go down Route 9 today, on your right is Fowler House Road. And if you're lucky enough to travel to Colorado, please go to the town of Fowler. You see, my legacy will live on forever because those places were named after me, Orson Squire Fowler. Now that is a successful life. Good day.
You may have already guessed who I am, but let me tell you more. I was born May 8th, 1858 to Michael and Annie Brouthers. The name's Dennis. We lived by Sylvian Lake and later moved to Wappingers Falls. After attending school for a number of years, I began to work at the Sweet Ore Factory. They became one of the first manufacturers of overalls, now known as blue jeans. In 1921, they were celebrating their golden age and decided to cash in on my celebrity by having me and 3 female employees engage in a tug-of-war over a pair of their overalls. What an advertisement. Standing at 6'2" and 207 pounds, I earned many nicknames, such as the Goliath of the League, Wappingers Falls Terror, and Mighty Irish King. But the name that really stuck was Big Dan Brouthers. I played with many teams around the Hudson Valley. While playing with the Wappingers Falls Actives in July 1877, I collided with the other team's catcher, John Quigley. He suffered a severe skull fracture and died a month later. I blamed myself even though the doctors decided it was an accident, so I quit baseball for good. However, I missed it too much, so in 1879, I decided to join a major league team, the Troy Trojans. From 1879 to 1904, I would play for 10 Major League Baseball teams, the last of which being the New York Giants, now known as the San Francisco Giants. While playing in Baltimore, I would have my Irish settler, Kelly, sit there quietly with the players. She helped to keep us all calm. After my retirement, the New York Giants would hire me for 20 years to do jobs for them. They called me a Giant for life. One hot summer's afternoon, 1932, I left this world. 2 weeks later, my beloved wife, Mary Ellen, joined me. We were married for 48 years and are buried together in St. Mary's Cemetery. I had a batting average of .349 and am known as one of the best hitters there is. So, in 1945, I was inducted into the Cooperstown, New York Baseball Hall of Fame. There were many great players. I was just lucky to do what I loved.
Cold December morning in Wappingers Falls. The year was 1912. My name is Mary. I am a seamstress at the Sweet Ore Factory. The noise was always deafening from all the running machinery. Suddenly, our superintendent, Daniel Walker, had all the machines shut down. I looked up from my work to see a small woman standing atop a workbench. Her name was Jessie Hardy Stubbs. She was a suffragette. She began to speak of a woman's right to vote. Miss Stubbs' voice was clear and strong. She had said everything and more that I had felt for many years. I had rights, including the right to vote. She, with Rosalie Jones and 2 other ladies, were women's suffrage pilgrims. 10 days earlier, they had marched from New York City. They were on their way to Albany to bring their political cause to the New York State Capitol. Jessica Hardy Stubbs' speech received a roar of applause and cheers. She inspired me to act. I joined 19 other factory girls and marched as far as Poughkeepsie with these 4 suffragettes. 2 months later, the Wappingers Falls Women's Equal Suffrage League was organized. We began to hold meetings at the members' homes and here at the Mesier Homestead. Women were granted the right to vote in New York State on November 6, 1917. On March 19, 1918, over 600 local women voted in the Village of Wappingers Falls election. I am proud to say that I was one of them. On August 20th, 1920, women were granted the right to vote in the United States under the 19th Amendment.
Thank you for watching. We hope you enjoyed our program. We sure had fun doing it. I want to thank all of our volunteers that brought those characters to life and told those amazing stories. I'm standing in the gift shop right now, and this is actually the site of the Wappingers Tea Party that Catherine Mesier told you about a while ago. We still sell tea, but we have many more books and merchandise related to Wappingers Falls and the surrounding area. We have great children's books and games, and we have lovely artwork from local artists and craftsmen. We love sharing history with you, but programs like this are not possible without your donations to the Historical Society, which you can always do by going online and going to our website. I would like to invite you now to come back and come visit on a private tour and see all of those beautiful rooms and learn more history about the homestead and about our beloved town and village. And finally, I want to thank you. Thank you all for your ongoing support for the Wappingers Historical Society.